black absorbs heat in the summer, which is bad, and absorbs heat in the winter, which is great. And you have to do really intense engineering calculations to figure out what is the better roof membrane. And oh, by the way, the better we insulate the roof assembly, we mitigate the effect of that color.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Dyami Plotke, Senior Project Manager for Roof Services on Long Island in New York. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Dyami, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Good morning, guys. It's nice to see you both again.
You know, I got to point out to folks that you have been podcasting long before me. And what is the name of your podcast? And are you still doing it?
The Modern Woodworkers Association podcast is, I'm proud to say, it's the longest continuously running woodworking podcast. And it predates your sister podcast over at Fine Woodworking by about 3 weeks. But we stand by those 3 weeks, and we're up in the 310, 320 episodes, something like that.
I would take every opportunity to remind them that yours predates theirs.
Oh, I do. It's with all that's going on in COVID, it's been quite a while since I've seen Ben in person, but it'll come up again.
On the subject, how's your work and home life changed since the pandemic outbreak?
Home life is, I'm going to touch on that first because that doesn't lead into the conversation the way the work life does. But the home life is, everyone is healthy, and really that's all I can be thankful for. We're both, my wife and I both still have jobs and are working, so income is the same, and our children are old enough that they can be left home alone. So a lot of the crises of not having childcare and needing to work the kids through the school, we are thankfully not dealing with that stuff. So I have nothing to complain about. I have 3 kids. One goes to school full-time, one goes to school hybrid, and one goes to school full remote. So the schedules are all out of whack, and it's a pain in the butt. But given what's going on, I got nothing to complain about.
What about work life? I bet that's changed quite a bit because you're the face of the company in many instances, right? You're going out and estimating jobs or dealing with clients. I bet that's different than it used to be.
Work has changed. It is less different now than it was in the start of the crisis. And we're in the Northeast as you guys are. So at least regionally, we went through the worst of this in the spring, in the late spring. During that time when we were essentially all completely shut down, we had a 2-month period there where, at least in New York, we could not have, you couldn't violate 6-foot spacing even on an exempted property. So we do a lot of hospital work. They were exempted from a lot of the shutdowns, but if the guys were going to be less than 6 foot apart, PPE didn't matter. You had to just shut it down. So we went through a 2-month period where we had to furlough our entire installation staff. And for that period, it was basically, there's 3 of us who have selling responsibility. We were working full time, trying to get prices out, trying to, keep work coming in, but it was very quiet and we weren't producing anything. During that initial crisis phase, I was still going to do inspections, but I would usually not meet with the customer or talk to them, from not go in the building. They'd stand in the doorway, I'd stand away, always with a mask, minimizing that face-to-face interaction. And then I would do a lot of presentations over the web through Microsoft Teams, through Zoom, through Skype. I used products like Sway. If anyone's familiar with Sway, you can turn Word documents into essentially a quick little PowerPoint very quickly. It's another Microsoft tool. So I was using things like that for what would have normally been face-to-face presentations. But quite frankly, since early summer, it's all gone back to face-to-face. Like we're keeping as far apart as we can within a given room. It's usually not a full 6 foot, but completely masked and gloved, and we're wearing all the PPE. But most customers would rather, in my experience, go over it in person. But my normal bid load was, say, 70% just an email and a phone call, no matter what was going on in the world, and 30% presentation. Now it's probably 80% email and a phone call and 20% presentation. But those presentations are still in person or in person again.
Is it both commercial clients that I know is the majority of your work, correct? Or is it residential folks who just feel more comfortable talking with someone from a roofing company when they're talking about working on their house?
The majority of our customers are commercial. Um, and right now, I just finished up a house. I have another house going as soon as they pick a color. So it's not that we don't do the residential stuff, but commercial is the bulk of our business. And the guys who specialize in residential construction are going to scream at me when I say this, but residential standard shingle roofing, it's not a big enough job for me to spend my time to go and visit them and present. The commercial jobs are much more complicated, much more expensive, much more involved. Ultimately, how big is the job is a huge determining factor as to whether or not we present.
Interesting.
And for the size of a residential house, 9 out of 10 times it's not worth presenting. Where we really get into residential work and where we will present all the time is on the more custom homes that aren't your standard shingle roof.
They're slate or they're wood shingles or something else, tile maybe.
Exactly. Slate, tile, wood shingles, flat roofing, a combination of the two, metal work, all things like that. That's where, as a company, we specialize in residential, is that kind of high-end custom stuff. And that will always go and present because it ends up being, frankly, it's more expensive. So it pays for us it's worthwhile to go and give the presentation. But even more than that, it's complicated. And there's a value to sitting down with the customer and working through it all so that they understand it. It's not that complicated to understand. I'm going to take the shingles off your house. I'm going to put new shingles on. I'm going to use 6 nails of shingle. It is a lot more complicated when we talk about how I'm going to take the flat roof and tie it into your drains, and then that ties into a slate over here, and I have to use metal trim on this spot, and they become much more complicated, and that is another factor that leads us to present in person.
I would expect a presentation if I was talking about a roof that way, right? You want to know that the person you're considering has got the chops to do the job, I'm assuming.
I think so. And most customers that I want to present to don't disagree, but I more often have someone say, no, just email to me. I don't want to do a presentation, versus have somebody say, no, I specifically want you to present to me. So I talk about like the houses. If you as a homeowner with just a regular, a high ranch up and over simple shingle roof, if you want to meet, I have no problem. I will go and meet. I'm not above that, but it's not that I'm going to build that sit into my normal process. Whereas on the commercial stuff, I do.
Gotcha. So how did you get into the roofing business? I know it's a family business. Can you talk a little bit about how you and your family got into commercial roofing in your area?
Sure. Roofing started with my dad. He started as a strip shingler in the 70s. And they were paid by the square. So it was as many shingles as he could put down in a day, it determined what they made. So that motivated him to be a fast, efficient worker. And he moved from being an installer to a foreman to being a subcontractor to running an actual business. And in the late 70s, early 80s, he realized that there was much more money to be had on the commercial side. Mm-hmm. So we've been doing commercial roofing since, the company has been around since the early 80s, and we've been doing commercial roofing really since then also. So he had a partner who was his brother who has retired. He has another brother, my uncle, who is still a partner. I'm there. I've had cousins in the business. Right now, in terms of family, it's just my dad, my uncle, and myself, but it has been as many as 5 or 6 of us at a time.
How do you all get along? I know that's very challenging sometimes to work with family. Is it have its ups and downs?
It does have its ups and downs. We're relatively good at compartmentalizing, and we have a decent family dynamic. So, and we like each other at work. We don't hate each other at work. So it works, but it is there are certainly complications there.
You all have to have similar goals, right? You have to work together and want to take the business in the same direction, I presume.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, you have to do that. And sometimes that adds, because sometimes your personal direction doesn't match up with that. That's where when there have been issues, that's what the issues have been, is that a personal direction and the company's direction are not merging together properly.
On the regular Fine Homebuilding podcast, on a number of occasions, commercial roof systems and details have come up because they're very tested. So we tell folks to look to the commercial roofing sector for solutions sometimes. Why are commercial roofing systems and details so much more reliable and thought out than residential systems?
The quickest answer to that is because in the commercial roofing industry, we offer the best warranties on any building component that is available. There's no other building component, commercial or residential, that guarantees that no water will come through it for 20 or 30 years. And commercial roof warranties are not, well, they're available, but real commercial roof warranties are not as simple as, well, here's a prorated material guarantee, and 5 years on, here's a check for 20% of the material, and it'll only cover if the material goes bad, as a lot of residential warranties are material based. These are what we in the industry term no dollar limit or full system warranties. And what they mean is that if there is a leak that is a result of a failure of the roof system, either the installation or the material, the manufacturer of the system, not the installing contractor, the manufacturer of the system pays to fix that leak and bring the building back to watertight condition. And because of that, the manufacturer has a big incentive to make sure that the job is installed right and the details are proper. As an installing contractor, I have to be certified by the manufacturer to offer the warranty. And on a job-to-job basis, I have to send in detailed plans of what I've installed. I have to pay them to provide the warranty. It's not included in the material price. And then they send an inspector out to certify the job has been installed as I said it was and per their specifications. And if there's any discrepancy there, I have to bring it to meet their specifications before the warranty is issued. And when we're dealing with commercial projects, I don't get the last of my money. I don't get my profit until I deliver the warranty. That's the last step of a project when we do closeout is I present the customer with the warranty and they present me with the final, usually it's about 10%. So installing contractors commercially have a huge incentive to do it right, to get the warranty so they ultimately get paid. So that was a long way of explaining why the detailing is driven by the manufacturers, and the manufacturers have a huge incentive to make sure it comes out right. It's not about ease of installation so they sell more to everybody who thinks they can be a roofer. It's about we need to install this properly so we don't have a leak and don't have a liability on the warranty claim. Because the dollars that these companies put together, there's a little bit of an esoteric example, but if you remember 15 or so years ago, all the Ford Explorer tires were blowing out, the trucks were rolling, it was a Firestone tire issue.
Yes.
Firestone, the parent corporation, took all the money to pay those lawsuits out of the Firestone Building Products Roofing Warranty Trust. So that's the kind of dollars these companies put aside to deal with
potential claims.
Exactly, with potential claims. But I think the other factor too is it's very specialized. So you get contractors who that's what they do is roofing. Like I could talk about 36 types of roofing with you, but I'm not a general contractor. I'm not a do-it-all. I'm not a handyman. I can't do your kitchen cabinets and your kitchen and your skylight and your roof. We only do the roof. And I think when any trade specializes in that given trade, the details end up being much better than if you're a jack of all trades. If you think about like a trim carpenter does trim carpentry much better than a general carpenter. And the detailing is very different. I think you could make the same analogy. I looked at a roof last week that my description was that it looked like it was installed by a carpenter. And it was done neat. And the components that were done well with a couple of exceptions. But the biggest thing was that it was just missing lots of things. And it struck me that the person who installed it probably meant well, was doing a nice job, was concise and concerned about it, but didn't have the understanding how to do it all properly.
Given the attention to detail and the inspection process and the reliance on tested assemblies, are there still failures and what happened? And I'm sure that's difficult to answer, but are there generalities?
There are failures. On average, we comprehensively replace, either completely go over or rip the old roof off and put a new roof on, depending on the circumstances, but comprehensively replace one roof a year for a manufacturer under the warranty. And knock on wood, most of the time, those are not roofs we install. On the 2 occasions I can think of where we did install the roof, it was because of a material failure and had nothing to do with the installation we did. So The manufacturers will step up and spend when they have to cover these warranties. But in terms of what causes the warranty failures, usually, and this is probably a 50%, it's installation error. Somebody didn't prime it properly. Somebody didn't heat weld the joint well enough. A lot of different systems have different types of priming, but lack of priming can be a huge problem. But there's also issues. Right now, the movement is towards white roofing. TPO is a very popular membrane. TPO introduces condensation issues that did not exist in black roofing. And we can get into that in detail if you want, but that's a reason why some roofs are failing these days.
Is that moisture on the inside, though, right?
Yes, that's moisture on the inside.
Yeah. So we should briefly explain to folks, there's this phenomena when you have no cloud cover at nighttime, and you're going to have to tell me if I go off the rails here, right, Dyami? Is that the roof surface is going to get colder than the air temperature, and it becomes a condensing surface for any incidental water vapor that's in the building. Is that correct?
That is correct. And this is true of residential flat roofing to an extent, but it's very true for commercial buildings, is the assemblies are often steel, polyisocyanurate insulation, and a single-ply membrane. Steel has joints that are usually screwed together. It's not airtight. The polyisocyanurate, you're familiar with it, Patrick. It comes in 4x8 or 4x4 sheets. They're butted together, but they're not airtight.
Mm-hmm.
So the roof functions as an air and vapor barrier. So what happens is the warm, conditioned air of the occupied space gets through the suspended ceiling, gets through the steel, gets through the insulation, and in the wintertime condenses on the underside of the membrane. Now, black roofs, EPDM rubber, torch-applied roofs, black roofs get to be about 180 degrees on a 90-degree summer day. And that heat drives the moisture out. So historically, single-ply roofs in the wintertime, they condensed a little bit. It's not a big phenomenon. They condense a little bit. And in the summertime, they dry out a little bit. And I don't want to call it a virtuous cycle, but it's a cycle. And it goes back and forth, and it never gets too bad. With white roofing, we still have that exact same condensation in the wintertime, but we don't get warm enough to dry it out. On that same 90-degree day, a white roof is about 120 degrees. So it's 60 degrees cooler, and it doesn't generate enough heat to drive the moisture out. So now, this winter, a little bit of moisture went up there. And over the summer, instead of it drying out, it just stayed. And next winter, a little bit more goes in, and a little bit more goes in. And on the roofs that have this problem, it's usually showing up in the 6 to 9 year range as to how long it takes for this to manifest. But it is a distinct problem in the industry, and it is driving. They're not universally necessary yet, but it is driving a push towards air and vapor barriers, where in that same assembly, we would put an airtight air and vapor barrier on the steel deck, and then our insulation, and then our membrane. So we keep the internal air out of the roof.
Do you think that the potential problems make it unwise to use white-colored membrane roofing?
No, but I think that people need to consider the benefits of white membrane roofing before choosing it. Right now, in the commercial space, and to some degree the residential space, white roofing has huge mind share, and people think it's very efficient. I'm dealing with a customer right now. It's a college, and we're in the process of roofing our 9th building for them over the last 5 years. And every roof we've done there has been a black EPDM roof. And they have a new vice president, and they're switching to white. They want to be energy efficient. Well, where we live, I'm on Long Island, you guys are in Connecticut, which is basically the same
climate zone.
Same climate zone, exactly. You guys are a little bit colder, but we're very similar. White to black is pretty inconsequential because white reflects heat in the summer, which is great, and it reflects heat in the winter, which is bad. And black absorbs heat in the summer, which is bad, and absorbs heat in the winter, which is great. And you have to do really intense engineering calculations to figure out what is the better roof membrane. And oh, by the way, the better we insulate the roof assembly, we mitigate the effect of that color. So when we're doing, in New York State, we're doing R30 as our state mandated insulation systems. And when we do tapered insulation, it used to be an average R, now it's a minimum R. So we're getting tapered insulations with average R of 35 and 40, and they're getting to super insulation values. So when you put that much insulation underneath a white or black roof, it mitigates the impact of the color. And we live in a climate where it's basically a wash. So for my customers, I tell them that that it's a wash and that they're not more or less efficient one way or the other. So you let the other factors be the determining factor. Now, if we were, in northern Maine or Canada, it'd be black and the white would be inefficient. And if we were down in Atlanta, it'd be white and the black would be inefficient. But where we live in the sweet zone right in the middle, it doesn't really matter.
Hmm. But I think most folks would say, and I think you've probably experienced them telling you this, is the urban heat island effect is another reason to try and have light colored roofing. Do you have a adequate response to those folks who are concerned about that?
The urban heat island effect is a real phenomenon. And I think that white reflective roofing and even more than that, garden roofing have a tangible impact on it. However, urban heat island effect is a communal issue. And I have yet to meet a building owner who is concerned by it. In New York City, we're seeing the city is driving. They don't quite force you to do a white reflective roof, but they strongly encourage it. So everything we're doing in the city these days is white and reflective for those reasons. But quite frankly, most building owners don't care. And not that, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but it's hard for somebody who owns a single building to conceptualize that greater effect. Like individuals, it's hard to conceptualize, global warming. It's too big for one person to think about. That's what I tended to find. So from a municipal level, I think there should be drive for that because we do want to reduce heat island effect, but it doesn't often come into play in a discussion with an individual building owner.
Interesting. You and I have talked about, with relation to modern architecture, where you have glazing going all the way to the floor, either sliding patio doors or huge windows. Your area especially, this is a huge deal because you have a lot of waterfront property on Long Island, and these are very expensive homes. The go-to solution for these kind of assemblies are these epoxy roofs. And you told me that they can be difficult to work with, but oftentimes they're the only solution for these type of architectural styles. Can you talk a little bit about those and where they come from? I think in our previous discussion, you said that they started out in Europe, as many things do.
Yes, most of the liquid systems that we're familiar with and we deal with come over from Europe. Companies like Suprema, like Kemper, the old liquid plastics that's now been bought by Sika. These are European liquid systems, each with slightly different chemical composition. Generically, they're epoxies, but they each have their own little niche. And they are wonderful in situations where you have lots of detailing right in together and you don't have the space to put down a typical membrane, or you can't do the fastening that is required with a membrane. Let me back up for a second for membranes. All membrane systems, torch-applied asphalt, cold-applied asphalt, single-ply, EPDM, TPO, PVC, all membrane systems require mechanical attachment at the base of a wall where the flat transitions to a vertical and at every edge. There are times when you can't put that fastening in.
Because windows or doors are in the way.
Exactly. Windows or doors are in the way, or it transitions to a cedar roof and you don't have a spot to put the fasteners. There's a number of reasons why, but when you can't do that fastening, or when you have these clusters of oddly shaped penetrations right on top of each other, those are the times when the liquid systems excel. So the example that I always use for when to do a liquid system is when you have some of these big box style architecture we deal with out in the Hamptons. In the span of 18 inches, you'll transition from metal to concrete to glass. That's where a liquid system really works well.
And how do you guys are there limitations with regard to temperature and weather? It would seem to me like this chemistry is fraught with peril for a construction site.
The chemistry is. So the short answer to that is yes. But I talked about how they're different compositions. The Cecolastic product, which used to be liquid plastics, is a one-part product. When it is warm enough to install, I think it is arguably the best one on the market. It performs very well, and it is technically challenging, but not overly challenging to install. And quite frankly, as skilled as we are as installers, the easier the installation is, the more likely it is to come out right, the less chance there is of a problem. So if I have two products that are going to perform equally and one is easier to install, I'm going to do the one that's easier to install. And that's true of the Cecolastic product. Competitors in the product are a different chemical composition called PMMA, and I could not begin to tell you what PMMA stands for, but it's a two-part resin. It's a resin component and a catalyst component. And where the Cecolastic, the one part, has a minimum installed temperature of 40 degrees. So that's really, in our market, a seasonal product.
Yeah.
The PMMAs have a minimum installed temperature of 18 or 20 degrees. So I can't install it every single day, but 350 days out of the year, I can install it. But what the trade-off is that the PMMAs are mixing a liquid resin that's measured in liters with a powdered catalyst that's measured in grams.
I can't imagine that going wrong.
You mix them at a ratio that's determined in the field based on ambient temperature and anticipated pot life. And the pot life is about 45 minutes. So when they're done properly, it's really good stuff, but it's hard to do it right. And it's obnoxiously expensive.
Do you pour it on the roof? Is it like a rolled on material? What physically is it like?
You're using a 2-part primer. So you're going to prime the surface, and you mix the catalyst in, you stir it up, and you use a roller, and you put the primer down. The primer is a yellowish clear. And then once the primer is cured, which again is about a 45-minute pot life, so it sets like that. So it cures very quickly. Then you're using the catalyzed resin, and that's usually like one of those little 6-inch detail rollers that doesn't have the full cage in it. Those are the types of rollers we use, the foam rollers. We'll use them. We put it down, and then we embed a polyester fleece in it or a fiberglass fleece, depending on the brand. And then we want about 2/3 of the resin beneath the fleece. We dry roll the fleece in, and then we put 1/3 of the resin on top of the fleece. And that's done. And on a given, penetration, that can easily be done in the span of an hour. But the flashing components are typically set in 15-kilogram pails. And the 15-kilogram pail, again, once you mix it, it's got a pot life of about 45 minutes. When it's done, it's rock hard. You throw it away. You can't do anything with it. That 15-kilogram pail will do about 100 square feet, 80 to 100 square feet. But you can't mix partial pails. So if I can't use that whole pail up, I throw it away. Mm-hmm. It leads to a lot of waste. And the pails are almost $500 a piece. So wow. It gets really expensive really fast when you can't be efficient. In a perfect world, if you don't have waste, they're not that expensive. But when you factor in all the other components, they get really expensive really quickly. So that's why, at least as a firm for us, when they solve a problem, they're the right system. But generically, they're not what we usually go to the table with, because more often than not, there's a much better value that solves the problem in the same or a better way, depending on what the problem is.
What a great segue. So more commonly, you guys are installing membranes, right? And there's some applications for these in residential work too on low slope roofs. Can you talk about the common products and what their respective pros and cons are? Absolutely.
The most common residential flat roof that most people are familiar with, I would think, would be a modified asphalt roll, which is like a 3-foot wide, usually a granule surfaced sheet. GAF, the shingle manufacturer, makes a line of peel and stick modifieds that have granules in the modified to match the colors of their shingles. It's called Freedom is the brand, is the name of their line. And those products they're easy to install. They're really easy to install wrong. They're easy enough to install properly. But they get sold a lot because, again, it comes down to, does the person doing them have the specialized knowledge to do them? Most people who are good shinglers can install these peel and stick modified sheets in an acceptable manner. You shingle, they shed water. It's different, but it's not radically different. So
are they self-adhesive?
They are self-adhesive. There's plenty of others that are either torch applied or set in mastic, but the particular one I'm talking about from GAF is a peel and stick, so it's self-adhesive. That introduces some temperature restrictions, but you don't have to put a torch on someone's house, which is never a good idea. So that's what we see a lot of. And when it's done, the average installation of that I see, which is done probably 80% as good as it should have been done, is going to last a homeowner in the ballpark of a decade. Maybe it's only 8 years, maybe it's 12. It depends on the pitch, but it's going to last about 10 years. If you do everything exactly the way they say, it's 2 plies of membrane, you're double wrapping the flashings, you're probably going to get that to 15, maybe 20 years if the roof drains really well. But by the time you've done that work of putting 2 plies of this down and double flashing everything, I could put an EPDM roof for the same or less money. And I know we've done articles together with the EPDM roofing. EPDM it's vulcanized rubber, so it's real rubber from a rubber tree. If people think of a tire inner tube, that's EPDM. And when we glue that down, most residential construction, we're gluing it down over plywood or over a 1/2-inch high density insulation board. We're usually not adding insulation above the roof deck. Usually homes are insulated below the roof deck, but we can add insulating insulation. But so we put the insulation down and we glue that down. That is a 20 to 30 year roof, not a 10 to 15 or 15 to 20 year roof. And you got a guy who does a little bit of everything and has a pickup truck and a torch, and he's going to go up there and he's going to torch down 3 or 4 rolls. That's going to be the cheapest installed cost to the homeowner, but that's going to last them less than 10 years. We come and we do a proper EPDM job. That's going to be more expensive, but again, it's going to last a homeowner 20 to 30 years. And then to do the proper double layer modified roofing is going to be about the same price as us or a little bit more expensive because it ends up being more labor because you're installing the sheet twice. Yep. And those are really only 15 to 20 year products. So I see a lot of asphalt roll roofing residentially because it's easy to install. And I think most residential contractors are afraid of their own pricing, if that makes sense. Roofing is expensive. It's not inexpensive. It is expensive. And for most homeowners, the $10,000 to $15,000 that the average just shingle rip and re-roof does. There's nothing fancy about that, but that's what the pricing is in this market between our insurance and the products and the labor and everything. That's a lot of money for most people. So I understand why they go for the less expensive options all the time. And if they want to do that, that's wonderful, but that's not the market that we're in. We need to be able to give it a warranty and trust that it's going to be watertight or we don't do it.
Yeah, and you can't afford to be coming back to fix things after the fact, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Dyami for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. You can hear the second part of my 2-part interview with Dyami next week in podcast episode 292. Please remember to send your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody, and thanks for listening.